So the talk today is right understanding. And that's a difficult one for someone like Shunryu Suzuki and his practice and teaching of Zen, because he kept saying over and over and over again, you can't teach Buddhism, it has to be practiced. And the reason why you can't teach Buddhism, or it's hard to teach anything with a sense that this is truth, is he said there's two sides to every coin. So if we emphasize one side, we always know there's another side to it. So it's hard to talk about both of them simultaneously. So as you're reading, if you read his book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, you'll see it filled. We laugh about everything is bad, but everything is good, because it's all paradox. Because what he points out is if we just tend to emphasize one aspect, the other side gets left out. For instance, and this, by the way, I mentioned in my email why therapists tend to like Buddhism. Buddhism talks about life being suffering, and a lot of our spirituality can skip over that. Not just New Thought spirituality. When I worked in a psychiatric hospital, there was one floor on there that was a Christian unit that someone had started because he had been part of a fundamentalist Christian faith, and he had a brother who was gay who then died of AIDS. And so he created then he started seeing what he called toxic faith, where people were using their spirituality. They were forgiving people who were abusing them and staying in homes that were very abusive and using spiritual principles. So he started a whole unit for people to come and do healing processes that were psychologically affected by negative experiences, but doing what we call spiritual bypass. Just using sort of, I'll love them, I'll keep loving them, I'll keep forgiving them, and we stay in these very unhealthy places. So he called it toxic faith. In Buddhism, there's that allowing of the shadow side. There is an allowing of life. Well, one of their the first noble truth is life is suffering. So there's not a denial of that which is challenging on the path, and their spirituality is about directly facing it, not ignoring it. It's not about ignoring the good things as well, but it's including both of them. So therapists like Buddhism because there's a way to be with the shadow. What we call the shadow, they would just say it's part of life. The reason why we call it a shadow is because we tend not to look at it. So spiritual practice is about being able to be both, and that's not easy. And so in New Thought, we tend to focus on the positive, and that's not bad either. So Carl Jung used to say, we go back and forth, these pendulum swing of inferior and superior, and we want to feel superior better than, because we want to overcome our feelings of inferiority. So we want to feel superior. And then when we feel inferior, we really want to feel, we're sitting there wishing we could feel superior like other people. We feel like everyone else is superior. So it's like this egoic pendulum swing. And it's to start recognizing that even if things are going well, are they going well because we just are genuinely feeling joy in the present moment? Or is there that secret egoic part of us that says, oh, I'm a little bit better than those other people. I'm a little bit better than someone else who hasn't been able to manifest this or doesn't have this in their life. Because now I feel like I'm solid because I'm a little bit better. Like my good, it depends on other being better than other people. That's when we know it's coming from ego, because it's better and worse. That's all the pendulum swing. So it's not bad to have positive things. It's not bad to even strive for positive things. Sometimes I don't want it to seem like I'm against it. I think we're all impacted by our life. And I happen to grow up with a really positive, upbeat world, mother, family, and was very focused on being positive and upbeat, not because it was the right thing. I just think that was who my mom naturally is positive and upbeat. And it was contagious. So I think we all had that general feeling of life is good, and strength and power were very much embraced, to feel strong in your life, to not be a victim. And what I learned as I got older was there's a shadow side to that on the other side of always being positive and upbeat and strong, there's the side of weakness. There's a side of sadness. And so then I started going to therapy. I became a psychology major. I worked in a halfway home with juvenile delinquents. I then went to work in a psychiatric hospital because I was just like so fascinated by this whole side that had been ignored my whole life in myself and in the world. And then not ignored, but looked down upon for people, not people who have suffered, but people who took sort of a victim mentality. So I think it was hard, actually, for my whole family when I started doing therapy and started looking at my pain, because they're like, just get over it, Harriet. You know, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. But it was and then I found I got tired of that, because then I found myself around people complaining all the time and sad all the time, like, oh, this is no fun. I want to go back to those positive people. They're way more fun. And I started noticing this pendulum swing of like, well, where do I belong? So what I really want to focus on in our conversation about right understanding is one thing that Wayne said in the reading today that really appealed to me was that Buddha was stable. It wasn't about he was really happy and full of light. It wasn't he was really sad or depressed. He was stable. And I was thinking about this stability and philosophy. In our Spiritual Leadership 2 class, we're reading The Mountain of Silence, which are about the monks on Mount Athos. And Father Maximos continually talks about bringing everything back to God. Everything is used for God, good and bad. That there is a stability there, and it's not theology. He just focused on, it's not a theology, it's a direct experience. And I thought that's exactly what Shunryu Suzuki's saying. It's not a philosophy. Stop coming to me for a philosophy. It's a direct experience. Yogananda, stop thinking about stuff, meditate, get to know who you really are. Ramana Maharshi, get to know who you really are. It all comes back to something. Right understanding has to come from an experience beyond what we can articulate, because the moment we articulate it, there's another side to it. There's always a limitation to whatever I say up here. The opposite is true as well. And this becomes a challenge in a spiritual teaching, because there's anything that we say, if we get attached to any theology, any structure, we are limiting ourselves. If that becomes our identity, and I think many of us have seen that in whatever traditions, if you are raised in a religious tradition, you can see perhaps the limitation of identifying with that religious tradition. But the same thing can happen in a New Thought progressive teaching. I remember, actually, because I grew up in an agnostic world where we were told to question everything, I never experienced dogmatism until I came into a Science of Mind church. I was in a class, and these issues would come up, and someone would say, well, Ernest Holmes says on page da-da-da-da-da, and for everything that was said, well, Ernest Holmes says, I'm like, well, who cares what Ernest Holmes says? And I realized, oh my gosh, this is what dogma looks like. Like there's an answer for everything. So we know when we are attached to a theology or a structure, no matter how big it is, Ken Wilber's come up with this huge theory of how to look at things, and I was just reading something yesterday of how he completely misunderstood this or that. Whatever theology or construct, it doesn't have to be a theology, whatever construct we have of the world, it's temporary. It's going to change. It's going to move because it's in the human world. Our thoughts can only go so far. The way we articulate can only go so far. And there always will be someone who can argue with us about the opposite being just as valid, being just as true. And if I'm attached to this one construct, I've limited myself and I'm rigid. I have a rigidity. We can be rigid in New Thought. I've seen it over and over. I've seen ministers who are very rigid. This is what New Thought is. This is how we practice it. And if you're not practicing it, you're not in alignment with what New Thought teaches. And they have a very strong sense of what this is and how it should be lived. That's not right or wrong. It's just a limitation. I wouldn't say it's right understanding of truth. So how that's outpictured for our community and how it's outpictured for the teachers that I have valued was in the practice. You know, even when I was at Agape, are you all familiar, not just with the name, but have you seen a little bit of an Agape service in Los Angeles? a little bit, a few of you. So Agape is a big church, spiritual community, mega center. And Reverend Michael is African American, and he's very cool in that his main practice is Vipassana meditation, Buddhist meditation, but he found that they were just too... So he brings his sort of Southern Baptist preaching style to a very evolved teaching. So the services are high emotion. He's jumping up and down. He's pontificating. He's great with words. Has such a clever use of words. The musicians, the music, everything is so like, oh, it's a very emotional place, and there's so much emotion, and it feels so good. It's all about, we love God, we love the absolute nature, and it's a diverse place. It's diverse not just in racial makeup, it's diverse in all the different types of religion, people who practice. It's a beautiful place, so much emotion, so much love is there. And yet when I was in the middle of it, Shunryu Suzuki talks about this, about being in a monastery. When you're in it, it's not like this big, great thing anymore. It's really great when you're going to visit or you're going sort of, at first, it's all new. But then you're in it all the time. And it becomes A, it becomes normal. And B, you realize there's still just as many conflicts. People, I remember working in the office and someone coming in, wow, it must be like heaven working here. It's like walking on light. And I'm like, I was so surprised. I'm like, what? No, we have a lot of conflicts. There's problems that come up every day. People are always upset because when you're in emotion, when you're in all that passion, when all you're on fire, you got a lot of heat. You got a lot of stuff coming up. And so there were usually people pretty angry almost every day about something. And I remember making a note to myself, like even when something seems so great, people are upset about something because that's our human nature. We're healing. So, and I don't mean to say it was a beautiful place, but that's what happens when we start opening up the heart and it gets heated. A lot of stuff comes up, a lot of passion and a lot of stuff that needs to be healed. So it wasn't just like ease and grace because it had all this emotion and all this love of God. And it had its challenges just within the business functioning of a growing church at the time. I mean, there was a time where we were paying rent on 3 different places every week. So financially, it was a challenge for a long time. Different things come up. And what I noticed also with Reverend Michael, he's this big, passionate guy on Sunday mornings, but he wasn't like that during the week. As a teacher, he wasn't like that. He was very quiet. And what I started to notice is what made him powerful for me, what I started to really get was this stability. There was just this stability that he could jump up and down all, on Sundays or be really still or have everything sort of falling apart, go through very difficult times. And I've seen him go, and that's lasted for quite some time. And yet there was this stability. There was this constant, and what I knew, it was his daily spiritual practice. And his wife said that once. Ricky said, I remember, there was some event, and she was introducing him, and she was saying, I live with him. And every day, no matter where we are, they travel all over the place. He does not miss his spiritual practices. It's the one thing that no matter where he is, he does his spiritual practices. And they take a long time. That's what Shunryu Suzuki is saying. Just show up over and over. Don't do it for some ecstatic high, like, oh, I'm meditating and this is the most wonderful experience. Because a lot of times it's boring. Boredom, by the way, is not God. I just have to say, I don't talk about this much, but I want to say that sometimes we think we want drama because the other side of drama is boredom. And then I think sometimes we think boredom is what the peace of God is. Like, wow, this is peaceful, but it's really boring. That's not what God is. Boredom is a feeling and emotion just like anything else. And when we are in God, there's nothing boring about it. We were, again, talking about our monks, and Shunryu Suzuki talks about this being when he was in the monastery. There's not a day that went by that they were bored. When you're filled with the power and the presence of God, you're not bored. So boredom is something that comes and goes. But that starts to come up when we're doing repetition and we're so used to our excitement coming from drama or from intellectual stimulation, from reading a lot of books. When we think that's what brings us alive is our mind or the emotions out here, then we get really attached to our mind or the emotions out here. And then when we don't have all that, we think it's boring. But if we go underneath, and you hear Shunryu Suzuki talking about this book, in his book, if you just keep practicing, you start recognizing there's something always going on underneath. Underneath all the highs and the lows and the mundaneness, there's always this underneath. And that's what the spiritual practices start to get to. When you show up day after day, I put in my notes, because it's been in my journal for so many years, no matter what. Keep doing my spiritual practices, no matter what. No matter what else is going on, no matter how I'm feeling, no matter if I'm sick, no matter if I'm ecstatically joyful, no matter how busy I am, no matter what, do my spiritual practices. Why? Because when we start doing them, and it's what he says in there, you can't know this if you don't do it. Because it's not a concept. This isn't a theology. It's not something you can teach. You can only experience it, and you can only experience if you do it. Just do it. Nike. I have to give credit. The underneath presence, the underneath sense that there's always something that is containing the good and the bad that's coming up. And so what happens, going back to the therapist, is when you start to really start connecting with that underneath by consistently showing up to your daily practices, then you have a stability to handle the suffering. You have a stability to handle the ecstatic good. You have a stability to handle the almost intense boredom that can come over. This is so boring. And that can feel overwhelming sometimes, like it's never going to not be boring again. And that's really important to notice, because then you're going to notice how you respond to that, and then how you follow up with that. I got to go create stimulation somewhere. I got to create a problem somewhere. If we really start learning that underneath process, we can be with all of those intense emotions, and boredom is intense, joy is intense, or conditional joy. Suffering can be deeply intense, but now we have something that can hold it, that we don't get devastated by it. What happens when we get really depressed is we feel like that's all life is. We get overwhelmed. It's never going to change. It's always going to be this hard. Always, always. And that's overwhelming whenever we feel that. That's the hopelessness that we start to feel. And that's why we do the spiritual practices, because as much as that doesn't mean you don't have those moments of hopelessness, but because you're doing these daily spiritual practices, you start to find, okay, I get it. I'm feeling hopeless, but that's not true. And it's not a concept. I'm saying it as words, but when you're showing up every day in your spiritual practices, it becomes beyond a concept. It becomes a deep, deep knowing that you have in your soul. So it holds you and carries you through those times of hopelessness, through those times of depression, through those times of deep pain, and through those times of boredom, and through those times of like, oh, this is so good, I'm so afraid it's going to end, and we get really attached because it's so good and I don't want to go back there. And, it can hold that too. We can have those incredibly joyful feelings that we don't ever want to let go of because they're so much better than where we came from. We can have that, but also have this underneath. I always have this. I always have this presence. That's what right understanding is. I don't have anything to add to it. What I will say is one of the thoughts I've been having, and conversation we had a little bit on Thursday, is our community. So when you're doing a spiritual center, one of the common conversations is, how many people do you have coming to service on Sunday? Well, how's your budget? And so I've been thinking a lot about that. We've been going now for 2 years and had our board for 1 year. And so why aren't we growing on Sunday morning? And there's a lot of external things, but there's no question that communities reflect the consciousness of the person leading. And what I recognize in myself, because for me the spiritual practice is what's so important, because that's where I tend to put my love. So the spiritual leadership classes, for those of you who aren't in, I would like everyone to go to spiritual leadership classes eventually. So if you're not in them, I hope in the future you will be. But the focus is the spiritual practice. becoming, like, not just talking about it, not just say do it and then talk about other stuff and get really stimulated in other ways, but to actually focus on spiritual practice as a way of life, because that's where the enlightenment is. That's where I put my focus and my attention and my love. And I'm sure Jack has heard me say over and over, oh, I just love classes. This is why I do ministry. And in my head, I'm thinking Sunday services aren't that important because the real work is happening in the classes. That's what I have in my head going. Where people are really deepening is in the classes. Sunday service is for the fun. It's for the emotion. It's for good music. It's just for us to commune together. And so I've been with that and saying, first of all, I have to change my internal dialogue about that one. But to say, what are the, and we're going to put out a survey soon. And it's important because this talk today is the heart of what gets me going, the spiritual practices. I've been doing them for 20 years, and I had to look at my own life. It's what's filled me. That's what's filled me. I've done all the classes, and I did great at all of them, but none of them fed me the way my daily spiritual practices did. So that's where I focus my attention, and that's where I get excited. But it's all of it. It's the whole picture. What I had to keep saying is, I turned on the Agape choir tape the other day, and I just got all teary-eyed. It brought back all these memories, and I think I take some of that stuff for granted. It's the music. It is. All of it matters. All of it matters. But what mostly matters is us, is you. So we're going to send out this survey, and we're going to be asking you questions, and I need to hear your answers. The board needs to hear your answers, but I need to hear your answers. I know what matters to me. I just shared with you what matters to me, but I need to know what matters to you, to all of you, and to people that you know who may be drawn to a community like this. When you come on a Sunday morning, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that really matters to your soul when you come? What's going to make you get out of bed, want to get out of bed, and be here? What do you want during the week for yourselves? So this is just an invitation to look out on your email when we send out the survey. Please fill it out. And if you know other people who aren't here today, I know there's a lot of people in classes who aren't here today, please invite them to take the time to fill out the survey. And even friends who might be interested. We'd like to get a lot of people's feedback as much as possible. Right understanding. People's feedback are words, and there's that which is underneath. I'm looking for both, the underneath and the words. That's what the integral consciousness, this vast consciousness, is all about. It's not about just ascension. It's not just about what's happening underneath. It's also what's happening on the surface. It's the marriage of heaven and earth. It's not just heaven. It's the marriage of the absolute and the relative. We want to play in both fields and have them working in harmony and joy and abundance and creativity and passion and freedom and delight and love in every area of our life, inwardly, outwardly, underneath and above. Right understanding, the divine paradox, it's all of it. It's all of it. There's nothing outside of it. And that's my growth as well. And I look forward to hearing your responses, and I look forward to your continued spiritual practice life and hearing about it.